an abbey founded by a famous Scottish queen called St Margaret, who was an English princess who married the King of Scots. And we passed a little earlier the Loch Leven, where a very unhappy Queen of Scots, Mary Queen of Scots, was kept prisoner. And it has been through that history of Scotland that the Queen has been passing as she approaches now the Queensferry Crossing. And the Queensferry Crossing is where St Margaret used to have the boat that crossed to get her from one side to the other. And it was opened by the Queen not all that long ago. And it is one of the three great crossings of the Firth of Forth. And once Her Majesty crosses from the Kingdom of Fife, it's a short distance then to her capital city of Edinburgh. And you see the great rail bridge on the left, and the endless view that it's a bridge that once you finish painting it, you have to start again. And then in the middle, the first of the road bridges, which the Queen opened at an early point of her reign, and with the pressure of the requirements of traffic, the great Queensferry Crossing, which Her Majesty will be conveyed across shortly. And as we go in to see that moment, we know that she's being followed in the car behind by the Princess Royal, and she is accompanied by her husband, Sir Tim Lawrence. We saw a photograph of the Princess Royal as she left Balmoral earlier today with the Queen at the start of this journey. And in that photograph, we saw the face of a daughter who was accompanying her mother on this journey and crossing that amazing bridge now. Again, traffic stopping, people gathering to watch this moment, and on the bridge perhaps too, people witnessing as she crosses away from the Kingdom of Fife. The traffic on the bridge, on the northerly lane, pretty much at a standstill to witness the Queen dominate the southbound avenues. And in the background, the Royal Dockyard of Rosyth, and looking into the Firth as it winds its way up into the heart of Scotland, this great wide firth of water, bringing us now to the central valley of Scotland, which at this end is dominated by the capital city of Edinburgh. And also a little further out to sea from this great bridge is where the Royal Yacht Britannia has been tied up alongside in Leith. So many memories that the Queen had. The Royal Yacht Britannia was designed and planned in the reign of her father, King George VI, to replace the Royal Yacht that the Queen would have remembered as a child and used before the war, which was the Victoria and Albert No. 3. But sadly the King died, and it was for the Queen and Prince Philip to design the Royal Yacht Britannia. Nobody knew what it was going to be called, and when she gave it its name at its launching over on the other side of Scotland, in Clydebank, there was a great cheer when she said, "I name this ship Britannia, and God bless all who sail in her." And the Queen and Prince Philip travelled Across the world, she is the most travelled of monarchs in our history, but perhaps no surprise after 70 years as our Queen. But once asked about the royal yacht and its decommissioning, she said if she had a choice, she'd love to just have it driven into a beach and live on it as just herself and not as Queen, perhaps, for the rest of her life. She loved it so much. One of the great ships to be built in Scotland, and still one of the most beautiful. The crowd's really forming here on these crossings and following the journey into Edinburgh itself. There's a point here where the roads will divide and the Queen's journey will then follow towards Edinburgh specifically. But look at the traffic on the other sides. If it's moving, it's crawling, as the awareness of this cortege has passed around and people seeing the blue flashing lights of the outriders at the head of the procession will alert people the late Queen is coming. The Queen came to Edinburgh in 1953, soon after she was crowned, and in St Giles High Kirk, where she will lie in state from tomorrow, she was presented the Honours 3 of Scotland, which were the crown, the sceptre, and the sword, as we've temporarily lost pictures. It might be interesting to see where they're waiting now for the Queen's cortege to arrive. But she was presented the crown and took it from the Duke of Hamilton at the time, and it was quite heavy, and it was interesting if you see the film how she almost had to struggle to hold it. This young 26-year-old woman, as she then was, who'd recently been crowned Queen of the United Kingdom. There'll be a bit of time before the Queen arrives at this spot, but clearly we just lost the shots there from the helicopter. But returning to it now, it's perhaps worth remembering that the Queen is being accompanied on this journey by her daughter, the Princess Royal. And we have a photograph of Her Royal Highness and Sir Tim Lawrence, who were seen as they left Balmoral on that very sombre journey. A daughter accompanying her mother from the home of their family in the Highlands. And she's still in the car immediately behind the Queen as that cortege approaches the capital city and the Palace of Holyrood House. Crossing the Cramond Brig, there's a special tradition that goes back to one of the early King Jameses of Scotland, who liked to walk amongst his people unrecognised, but he fell amongst brigands who beat him up, and a farmer heard that somebody was in distress and came and chased off the brigands, had no idea that it was his king, and washed the king's wounds. Still not knowing who this person was, the farmer was asked what he most wanted, and he said he'd love to own the farm where he was working. And the man said, well, why don't you come and visit me? I'm going to be at the palace in Edinburgh. And so the family went down and they went in, and they had asked, how will we recognise you? And he said, oh, well, you'll see me because I'm going to be wearing a hat. And when they arrived, they were told only the king wears a hat. And they went in and they met the king. And the king gave the farmer his land on condition that once a reign, his descendants would wash the monarch's hands. And I met Mr. Houston Crawford, who, as a young man of 10, had married King George VI's hands once. And then when he had the opportunity, he washed the young Queen's hands when she became sovereign. And I'm sure it'll be his grandson who will shortly be invited to carry out that tradition and wash the hands of the new King of Scots, Charles III.
Well, Alistair, you clearly know the castle here as governor of the castle. With me now is Louise Tate, the Queen's press secretary for Scotland for 15 years, and your office was at the palace, so you know the palace so well, and the Royal Mile falls between the two, does it not? Which this cortege will drive down. But talk us through what will happen at the palace, and much of what will happen there tonight will be to allow staff to pay their respects.
It will be that personal moment. Coffin will rest in the throne room, and at some point members of staff will be able to pay their respects, and a moment of high emotion, I'm sure, for them. Clearly we all knew this was coming, but it is a real shock. And Holyrood House is not a big palace, it's the smallest of Her Majesty's official residences, but it was somewhere that she enjoyed very much spending time, and the garden parties that were hosted for over 1,000 people. Incredible how she was able to meet so many people right up until obviously the pandemic.
Including for those who were members of the Order of the Thistle, the highest order of chivalry in Scotland.
The Thistle Knights and the Thistle Lady Knights. Yes, that is the highest order of chivalry. It comes after Garter in terms of rank.
And explain how the layout of the palace is. The oldest part is at the back, is it? And
the oldest part is on the north side, which is the Abbey, and that dates back to the 12th century. Then there's the tower, which was, I think I'm right in saying, was built by Mary Queen of Scots' father, James IV. I hope that's not wrong. My Royal Collection colleagues will be shouting at me. But then the other side of this east or south side of the palace is much newer. I think it dates to the 1600s. But it has had an interesting history. It was damaged by fire and gone to disrepair for a little while, but obviously it's come back as a real centre, especially since the Parliament is here now, to have those two things so close together, that juxtaposition of monarchy and government after devolution.
And certainly people are gathered here now outside the Parliament and the streets. There are stewards everywhere, barricades too, because just in front of us is where the cortege will come down and enter Holyrood
through Abbey Strand.
Abbey Strand
Gate,
and will enter Holyrood House. And as you say, the Queen will rest there tonight before making her way to St Giles Cathedral, doing the journey in reverse effectively and travelling up this historic road of the Royal Mile.
It's a very, it's got such a long history, the Royal Mile, and you're part of the old town of Edinburgh, and all those little alleyways and closes, and it's a real haven, or somewhere that tourists flock to, and during festival time, that location is, you can't move, and it's a real centre for celebration as well. It's a real focal point for Edinburgh.
And now the cortege, as you can see, once again, the pavements are packed with people who have been, no doubt, waiting patiently. This has been a long journey, waiting to get that glimpse. And before we've talked about, it's an almost tranquil moment for them. It feels like a moment of a silence for everybody as they see this cortege pass through.
It's that moment to reflect and have reality dawn. So you were asking me earlier about Balmoral, and I can only imagine the emotional anguish that they must have been feeling, and just trying to keep it together to as Ruth Davidson said, to do this right. And I've often said, people didn't know, and other people have said it too, how strongly they were going to feel when this actually happened. And I think many people were surprised at what they were moved to do, to go and stand at the side of the road as they are now. And you saw the tractors, and you saw everybody on the carriageway stopped to watch. It just felt like everything stand still when that cortege was passed.
Well, King Charles in his national address, drawing on that broadcast from Cape Town that the Queen had made on her 21st birthday back in 1947, whether she promised to devote her life to the Commonwealth, whether it be short or long, and to the services of her peoples. He said then that was more than a promise. It was a profound personal commitment which defined her whole life. She made sacrifices for duty. Did you see that?
I didn't see the sacrifices. I couldn't comment specifically on those. But yes, she lived it. It was palpable in her that she always at the heart of what she wanted was this meeting people, connecting and making that moment of connection with her easy for so many people in so many different situations, young and old. And she just had a great gift. And what I feel about that is just huge gratitude for that. She was, never share that cookie, I'm pretty sure.
Well, he also said in her life of service, we saw that abiding love of tradition, together with that fearless embrace of progress, which make us great as nations. The affection, admiration, and respect she inspired became the hallmark of her reign. And today we see that admiration and respect, but we also see the tradition too, which we know the Queen did enjoy.
Yes, and I think that's very, very important to reflect these traditions, and many of them have been seen for the first time, as we saw with the Accession Council yesterday. And it is part of the richness of pageantry, it's part of culture, and I think I can certainly speak to how Scotland's ceremonial events are slightly different to other parts of the country, but they're all distinct. Each of the four nations has a different way of demonstrating their culture and their civic life.
We saw there the High Kirk, as you put it, St Giles Cathedral, and the Queen certainly made regular visits there herself, did she not, as Sovereign of the Order of the Thistle. It is where her coffin will go tomorrow, a procession which will go from the Palace of Holyrood House with her 4 children following on behind, solemnly walking behind her up the Royal Mile.
That's what we'll see tomorrow. There will also be a small group of Royal Household staff, I believe, also walking up the Royal Mile. It's a very, St Giles is just, I love St Giles. It's slightly not what one might expect, I guess, for a cathedral. It's Presbyterian, but it does feel a little bit more ornate to me, to my mind, and it's not, it's very, very distinct, the High Kirk.
Well, dates back, 800 years or so, and I was speaking to one of the Edinburgh tour guides yesterday, and they were describing that it's had many incarnations as a school and as a prison, and they were telling me that beheadings took place outside. So the history of this place is truly fascinating, certainly, but really a strong part of the Reformation which took place in Scotland. And we heard, did we not, in that Accession Council yesterday, the separation of the Church of Scotland and the Church of England, and that King Charles had to swear the independence of the Church of Scotland, which really feels like it is centred on St Giles Cathedral.
Yes, I think that's fair to say. I think most people would perhaps think of St Giles and other wonderful cathedrals in Glasgow and other cities too. But that is the High Kirk, and it's around there that the General Assembly of the Church of Scotland meets each year. We spoke to Lorna Hood, and for many, many years, until the advent of devolution, it was said that The church was the most democratic institution in Scotland. But it was, I think it was 1707, the Act of Union, that meant that this was one of the conditions. The separation of Church of Scotland and monarchy. And that's demonstrated during Lord High Commissioner's Week, which is the Queen's representative to the General Assembly, when the monarch symbolically sits to the side and out, not in the body of the kirk, to symbolise that distinction.
Yes, and Scotland becoming a Protestant country in 1560, and St Giles's 400 years as a Catholic church coming to an end, the stained glass windows inside removed and all the old church silver melted down and sold to raise money for the redecoration. But more recently, the stained glass window as a mark to the national bard, Rabbi Burns, added to the cathedral in 1985, and possibly that is what we will see tomorrow when the family begin the service there. We know that Liz Truss, the Prime Minister, will now be joining them as well, and then there will be a vigil by the family, and it then will be time for members of the public to also enter the cathedral to pay their respects.
Yes, yes. That will be a very moving thing to witness, the vigil.
Queen Elizabeth II, in the centre of the Union flag, the children who've come out to witness history. The streets lined, as we have seen in other cities, that the cortege has made its way through Aberdeen, Dundee, and here in Edinburgh, Scotland's capital, as she makes her way to her official residence. Her body will rest overnight at the Palace of Holyrood House, and members of her household staff will pay their respects to the monarch for whom many have worked for years. Members of her family already arriving here, leaving Balmoral earlier today. The Duke of York, the Earl and Countess of Wessex, and their daughter arriving by helicopter to the grounds of the palace, taking part in the events of tomorrow, centred on that cathedral we saw on the Royal Mile. King Charles also flying up too, with the Queen Consort, the Prime Minister joining events here in Edinburgh tomorrow. There is almost a wonder, is there not, as people wait? Louise.
There is. That's bridge that come across now is the Dean Bridge. Just on the west side of the city.
And the route from there?
I wouldn't like to speculate exactly. There is an understood royal route of coming from the airport and so forth, but this is very close to the centre of town now, very close to the centre of Edinburgh. I think it'll be Princess Street and then up the Mound.
How hard is this for you to watch?
It is difficult, and you know, we've seen these pictures, but until we perhaps see this over our shoulders here, we might. I don't think it's sunk in yet, but you know, it's so grateful that so many people along that route have had the opportunity to see her one last time.
Louise Tate, thank you very much indeed. Well, let's head back to Alistair Bruce, who, as Governor of Edinburgh Castle, knows this area so well. Alistair.
Coming along Queensferry Road, and we're about to cross Dean Bridge and into the new town. And this really is the Queen returning to the heart now of Edinburgh City, the city that she first came to as a crowned queen in 1953, to which she returned almost every year apart from the period of COVID. And it was to the Palace of Holyrood House that she came at 11 o'clock on the 27th of June this year on her final royal visit to the capital of Scotland. It was quite soon after her Platinum Jubilee celebrations down in London. The nation had noticed how unable she had been to fulfill all the plans that had originally been put together, but she did attend at the beginning and at the end with balcony appearances. And so when she came to Edinburgh on the 27th of June, it was very heartening for those who wished her well to see her get out of the State Bentley, which is currently following her hearse with the Princess Royal inside. And she received the new Lord Provost of Edinburgh. She was accompanied by the Earl and Countess of Wessex and Forfar, who played their part in supporting the Queen's arrival. The Dean Bridge we look down at now, as Her Majesty now crosses Leith Water and comes into the new town. The new town itself was being built and was really an emblem of the revival of so much in Scotland after King George IV had come on his visit in 1822. And it was typical of the Queen that she wanted to mark the 200th anniversary of that visit by King George IV this year. Let's see her cross the bridge. The Queen returning to the city that was the name of the dukedom that King George VI gave her husband when she married him in 1947. And he was Duke of Edinburgh, and she was very proud to be his Duchess of Edinburgh. From Queensferry Road to Queensferry Street, and there, dead ahead, the castle and fortress of Edinburgh Castle and the old town of that great city, the Athens of the North, and the stronghold in that fortress of the symbols of the Scottish nation. The Queen's procession will come down to Princes Street and turn onto Lothian Road. The fortress where earlier today Lord Lion, King of Arms, gave the second of two proclamations here in Edinburgh, that Elizabeth II is dead and King Charles III is the new king. And there at the top of the Royal Mile we wait for the Queen's procession to come up and turn towards us. She first of all will skirt around the base of the fortress and come up Johnson Terrace. And only a few weeks ago, this area was athrong with the glories of celebration that is the Edinburgh Festival each year, where a profound quantity of youth, creativity and arts and culture come into this royal dukedom, the name of which she carried, and bring it to life. And just up the castle hill to the right of the church there, which is now known as the Hub, just up to the right there, the Castle Esplanade, where the Royal Edinburgh Military Tattoo takes place each year. All that seems a long way away, but the crowds fill now this most ancient of royal processional routes. There is no processional route older than the Royal Mile